If you've got your Bibles, turn to Proverbs chapter 6. We are continuing right along in our study through the book of Proverbs, and we've made some good headway. But as we open up to Proverbs 6, what you'll notice about our text for this evening is that it is full of illustrations. Now, illustrations is something that is no foreign subject for any form of teacher, especially not to a preacher. In fact, even going through seminary, there is a whole section of a preaching class that is devoted to the tactful use of illustrations, believe it or not. How you are to use illustrations in a sermon, how they can be helpful. And really, God is the one who is the best user of illustrations. God understands that the way that he made us, we love illustrations. We love stories that can make a helpful mental picture for us and encapsulate a certain lesson that we want to learn. There are plenty of even worldly examples of this. How many of you are familiar with Aesop's fables? All of these, yes, most hands are going up, and many of you probably still remember some of those stories that he wrote, small, short, helpful stories, but they teach a good lesson. Some of you may remember The Fox and the, or not The Fox and the Hare, that's a movie, The Fox and the Hound. I'm thinking of The Tortoise and the Hare. I don't know how I got Fox and the Hound, but The Tortoise and the Hare. That's probably one of the most famous Aesop's fables. One of my particular favorite of Aesop's fables is The Crow and the Pitcher. How many of you guys know about that one? You guys remember that one? There is a crow who's thirsty, wants water to drink, and there's a pitcher, and it's got just a little bit of water in it, but it's too deep, and the crow's beak isn't long enough to get down to the water, so it keeps on bringing rocks and placing them in the pitcher until the water level rises, and then it can drink the water. A pretty cool little illustration, but what's the kind of illustration, what's the lesson that we're to learn is that if you don't have the solution that you want, find a solution for the problem at hand. It's just a helpful little story there. But the Bible is also full, chock full of illustrations, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Apostle Paul uses several illustrations, but some of the ones he uses the most is comparing the Christian life to whether it be warfare and calling Christians soldiers who are to fight the good fight of faith. And Paul, even at the end of his life, says, I've fought the good fight, I've kept the faith, I've finished the course. And even in there, we have another illustration that Paul often uses, and that is that the Christian life is being an athlete. And it requires proper training. It requires hard work and discipline. It basically compares the Christian life to a race that we're to run with the intention of finishing well. But Jesus does this as well. I think Jesus is probably most notorious for this in all of his parables that he teaches during his earthly ministry, and Jesus does it perfectly. Jesus is why Jesus is often considered, and rightly considered, the best teacher that ever lived. Because Jesus has perfect knowledge of the human condition and has perfect knowledge of his own creation, and he blends the two together so perfectly in the illustrations that he uses to encapsulate the lessons that he's trying to teach. And we have the same thing before us in Proverbs chapter 6. I had you open up there. And in Proverbs chapter 6, this text presents three different illustrations concerning greed, diligence, and laziness. And it presents these so that you would have a proper motivation for all the work that you engage in throughout your entire life. This is what our passage is all about. It's three illustrations, one on greed, one on diligence, and one on laziness, so that you would have the proper motivation for all the work that you engage in throughout your entire life. And the first of these illustrations is found in verses 1 through 5, so read them together with me, beginning in verse number 1. The proverb begins, "My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, have given your pledge for a stranger, if you are ensnared in the words of your mouth, yes, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself, for you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten, and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, give your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler." This is our first illustration that's given. And if you're taking notes, point number 1, the lesson we learned from this illustration is to be cautious of where greed may take you. Be cautious of where greed may take you. And what's going on here in verses 1 through 5 may at first glance seem like something that we're not all too familiar with. There is security, there is a pledge, There is getting caught in a snare and then not giving yourself any sleep, but going to your neighbor and pleading your case. And then there's a hunting illustration that's given, and it all seems a little bit chaotic, and yet it's one simple illustration. And what we can think about this is kind of a business deal gone wrong. And so if we want to break down this illustration just into simple components, the son in this illustration, the person in focus, is acting like a guarantor or kind of putting up collateral in what would be considered a risky business deal. And so this is a business deal that's not necessarily above the law. This is even doing business with someone who is, at the end of verse 1, a stranger. And don't be confused by that word neighbor in the middle of verse 6. This use of the word neighbor is a very general use of the word neighbor. It's like in the New Testament when the person comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus basically tells him, everyone is your neighbor. And I think that word stranger at the end of verse 1 is helpful. So this is painting the picture of something that is not really good. I mean, what's happening here is you have been enticed into a business deal that you have no ability to control, and you're doing business with somebody that you can't really trust because you don't know who they are. And now in verse 2, something has happened. It says ensnared, you've been caught. And what is being pictured here is that you've gotten into a business deal. It was really risky. It was really a dumb idea to begin with. You had no ability to control the outcome of this business deal, and yet you got into it anyway, putting up what you own and your possessions and your wealth as collateral, and the inevitable has happened. This person who is a stranger, unable to uphold their end of the deal, now is putting everything onto you. It's now your responsibility to pay the debt that has been made by this business deal. You've been, as verse 2 says, you've been ensnared, you've been caught by the words of your mouth. The implication is here is that you've made a promise. You've given your word. You've struck in a handshake in the deal. You are now involved in this business deal that you have no ability to control and really had no idea what was going on in it to begin with. And so then what's going on in verses 3 through 5? The father's giving some practical help. He's saying, what are you going to do if you find yourself in a situation like this? Well, he tells them to go and save yourself because you've come into the hand of your neighbor, or basically you're at the mercy of your neighbor. So go and hasten, plead urgently with your neighbor, and do it in such a way that is persistent and aggressive, right? Give no sleep to your eyes or no slumber to your eyelids. And then even in verse 5, it's an illustration of a hunting illustration. Any of you who've gone hunting, you kind of have seen an animal once it gets caught in a trap. What's that animal doing? It's thrashing about. It's using every ounce of energy that it has to get itself out of the trap that it's caught in. Most of the time, this proves to be fruitless, but occasionally, an animal will break free from a trap that it's been caught in. Okay, well, how do we make application? Because this kind of seems like a really oddly specific illustration that we're seeing here. How many of you think you're going to be tempted one day to get involved in some kind of risky business deal where you've got no idea what's going on? Anyone think that that's going to be them? Yeah, no, I didn't really think so. Right? So is this illustration applicable? Like what's going on here? Well, here's at the heart of this illustration. What's going on in the heart of the individual that gets involved in something like this, right? I think a couple other illustrations, rather than just kind of a shady business deal, I think a couple of other illustrations that are a little bit easier for us is thinking about gambling, right? Going into a casino and gambling our wages, hoping to hit it big. Or maybe something that's a little bit closer to home, something that it doesn't have to be in a particular state to do, but the lottery. Right? What's at the heart of an individual who's getting involved in risky business, who's getting involved in, the lottery or trying to gamble? Like, what's going on in their heart? And I think we can pretty much boil it down to two primary things. And these two primary things that it boils down to are extremely applicable to each and every one of us. And those two things are greed and laziness. Write that down. It's greed and laziness. This is at the heart of this illustration. This person who is getting involved in this business transaction is being brought in as someone who really has no part in the actual business itself, right? They have been asked by a stranger, hey, I don't necessarily have the money to engage in this business deal, but I know you do. Hey, you don't have to do any work. You don't have to do anything. I'll do all the work. All you have to do is sign your name on this line, and if anything goes sideways, and don't worry, it's not going to. If anything goes wrong, you're up for the collateral for this business deal. But don't worry, I'm going to do all the work, and it's basically easy money for you. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is just sign your name on the line, and I'll take care of everything. That's kind of what's going on. And so a person who is greedy, a person who's not only greedy, desiring something, desiring particularly wealth or particularly desiring possessions, this is the heart of the individual in this illustration. Not only that, but there's also laziness going on here because they want the reward of hard work without actually having to do the hard work itself. And so this is why point number 1 in your notes is be cautious where greed can take you, because while maybe none of us are really tempted to get involved in shady business deals that we have no idea what we're doing, all of us have seeds of greed and laziness in our hearts, each and every single one of us. And so each and every one of us need to be careful to understand what is it particularly that we have a greed for. Is it for money? Is it for wealth? Is it for possessions? Maybe it's something in a different category. Maybe you have greed or a desire for reputation or recognition for a particular skill or for a particular thing that you do. Maybe your greed is actually relational and you have a desire to be well known, to be maybe more popular, or to have a certain reputation amongst your friends and have lots of friends. Maybe that is what you are tempted to in terms of greed. But each and every one of us deal with greed in our own hearts. I think if I'm just thinking about guys, oftentimes, for men particularly, there is often the temptation for greed when it comes to monetary things. I think it's almost kind of built into the idea of men, even in our society, that you need to have a great education, get a really awesome job, or have some kind of high income yielding skill so that you can earn lots of money. In our society, this is what is really placed upon the shoulders of young men. And I think unwittingly, a lot of us, even in Christian circles, adopt this kind of philosophy. That I need to earn as much money as I possibly can so that I can have some kind of lifestyle or provide some kind of lifestyle for a future family. And we may dress it up in some kind of religious verbiage, but really at the heart of it, it's greed. We want everything that this world can offer, and money for particularly young men. And I'm not saying that women aren't tempted in this way, but particularly for young men, this is often an area of temptation for greed. Women oftentimes, the particular temptation for greed, and ladies, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but typically it is more on that relational side. Right? There's a desire to be well known, to be well thought of amongst your peers, amongst maybe other girls. There's a desire even to kind of get the attention of someone who is a guy who's earning a lot of money. So maybe you don't necessarily want to be the one earning a lot of money, but you want that man who's earning lots of money. And so if he's not earning 6 figures, I'm not even considering him. And all of this, you laugh, but this is real in our culture. And it all seems a little bit silly to us, and yet the seeds of all of these things, listen, the seeds of all of this is already in your heart. You may not be giving full-fledged to all these greedy desires of your heart, and yet the seeds of them are there. And so we've got to be cautious where we see any of these roots beginning to spring up. Because what is greed really, if we boil it down? Greed is selfishness, the idolizing of really ourselves and what we desire. It's the idolization of what we deem as comfortable and leisurely. Even the world around you paints a picture for us that in order for you to be successful, in order for you to kind of make it, so to speak, you don't need to have a job because everything in your life is paid for. You've got what our culture would say is financial freedom. And so basically what financial freedom means in our culture is you have money coming in that you don't have to work intentionally for, and instead you get to spend your time doing all the fun things that you want, right? Whether it's playing sports, going on beautiful vacations with your family, or just maybe sleeping in and enjoying the rest at home. But this is what's painted in our society as the dream life. You've got that passive income earning you all the money that you could want, and you get to do whatever you want with your time. But at the heart of all these things, what is really our desire? It's the pleasing of our own flesh, the pleasing of our own desires and cravings. And again, money is just one of these. Greed can manifest or demonstrate itself or show itself in many different ways. And so I think a helpful and beneficial question to ask at this point is, where is your heart tempted to be greedy? What is it in particular in your life that you see the roots and the seedlings of greed in your own life? And no one can answer that question but you. What is it that you desire, you're willing to do whatever it takes to get there? The heart behind the person getting involved in this business deal is a greedy heart, but it's also a lazy heart. It's that person who feels almost entitled to not have to work. That person who says, I deserve to have these things, right? Maybe they're resting upon some kind of work they've done in the past, or maybe they just are completely deluded and think they shouldn't have to work. But there's almost an entitlement attitude that comes into this as well. The heart of an individual who wants everything that hard work brings, but is not willing to do the hard work itself, is a person who's very much entitled. And these are people that all of us, if we were to see them in front of us, we would have a bad taste in our mouth for them. And yet, really in our heart, sometimes we really desire that, to be that person. Maybe the bad taste in our mouth is, because this just isn't right. But then I think the other half of it is, I wish I was them. I wish I didn't have to work. I wish I could spend all my time doing all the fun activities and hobbies that I like. And so greed is behind this. I think there's laziness as well behind this illustration, which is what brings us to our second point, our second illustration of the evening, which is in verses 6 to 8. Read them with me. Verses 6 to 8 say, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, any officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest." Okay, if you're taking notes, point number 2 is be instructed by the diligence of the ant. Be instructed by the diligence of the ant. Verses 1 to 5, this is the person who's greedy, this is the person that's lazy, and now in verse 6, they get a name. They get a name. What is the name for the person who's greedy and lazy? The sluggard. And really, I've titled this message, Ant or Slug, and I think it's appropriate because you can even see kind of the fruit of the word sluggard and I'm not saying that this is the original Hebrew, but I'm just saying it's a helpful picture for us to paint in our own minds because everyone knows what a slug is, right? And I'm not talking about like a bullet in a gun. I'm talking about the insect. The slug that moves, have you ever seen Monsters University? You guys know that the slug creature that's like trying to get to class and it's like running really fast, but it's not even moving. That's a slug. They don't move. In fact, real slugs don't ever move that fast or even try to move that fast. Slugs are very sedentary creatures. They don't move very much. They don't move very fast. They're slow, sedentary, unmotivated little insects. And I think that's a helpful illustration. Here, look at that. You're getting a fourth illustration. 3 from the Bible, 1 from me. There you go. So the sluggard, we're calling them the slug just because I think it sounds great and memorable. But the ant versus the slug, and we've been given the instruction to do something that's extremely humbling, and that is to look at an insect as an example of diligence. I mean, how humiliating. How humiliating that we've got to stoop down and look at the dirt and see an ant colony to be instructed about what it means to work hard. And so if the first illustration in 1 through 5 is an illustration of greediness, here in verses 6 to 8 we see an illustration of diligence. And we need to find instruction from it. We need to be instructed by it. Because the ant, what's going on here in verse 7, I think it's helpful to see that the ant has no chief, no officer, no ruler. It's a comprehensive way of saying there's no one telling the ant what to do. There's no one looking over the shoulder of the ant saying, hey, you've got to get your work done today. Hey, you have homework that's due tomorrow. You've got a test that you've got to study for. The trash has to be taken out. The dishwasher needs to be unloaded. You guys catching what I'm saying? There's no one telling the ant what to do. And yet the ant still faithfully does and diligently does everything that it needs to do. But I think there's an even deeper understanding of this, and not a weird deeper understanding, but just a more helpful understanding that an ant is not working and being diligent just for its own sake. It's being diligent for the sake of the whole colony of ants. If you look down at an ant colony, there are hundreds, if not thousands of ants in a single colony, and all of them have a clear directive and objective of what they need to do in order to survive. And each ant knows its job. It's to go to collect the food and bring it back to the colony so that all the ants, and you guys ever seen Bug's Life, right? They got to get all their food before the rain comes, and the grasshoppers are trying to, never mind. But the ant, it doesn't have anyone telling it what to do, and yet all the while it's still doing the very things that it needs to do to survive and to provide for the needs of others. This is the diligence of the ant, and it's humbling to us because oftentimes we are far less diligent than the ant and far more selfish than the ant. Part of this illustration is calling you a sluggard and calling the pupil or the student a sluggard, because even when we do work, even when we do get the tasks done that we need to accomplish, oftentimes the motivation behind it, the person that we're serving is ourself. We don't have necessarily anybody else in mind when we're doing the things and doing the different tasks that we have set before us on any given day, right? Why do I go to school? Well, it's because I have to go to school. And why do I try hard in my classes? Because if I don't, my parents are going to get on my back. Why do I do my chores? Because I'm going to get disciplined if I don't do them, right? Even some of you are older, you juniors and seniors, you may have a job, that kind of part-time job where you're able to earn a little bit of money. Well, why do I have a job? Well, it's because I can get that little bit of money and then I can put gas in my car and I can go on Friday nights or Saturday nights and hang out with my friends and have a fun time. Listen, I'm not preaching that you can't go out and have fun with your friends, okay? That's not what Luke is saying. But what I am saying is the motivation for all that you're doing is selfish. If the only reason why you do the work that you do is to benefit you, you're still a sluggard. If all the work that you engage in is only meant to benefit yourself, I would say you're still lazy. And so here we need to learn from the example of the ant, not only because the ant is a hard worker, which, listen, I would be thankful if all of you would learn the lesson of hard work from the ant, but greater than this is learning the example of selfless work from the ant. The ant's not laboring just for itself. The ant doesn't need anybody telling it what to do. It is selflessly motivated, and it is self-motivated, meaning it doesn't need anybody else to be egging it on. All the parents watching the live stream are like, yeah, preach at them! And I say that in jest, but at the same time, how much do your parents have to get on you? To do your chores, to get your homework done, to study for that test next week? Even those things are just simple examples of being diligent. But what I want to do is actually this. I want to challenge your motivations. I want to challenge why it is you do the things you do. And I want to challenge the effort that you give into each of the things that you do. Why do I put in the certain level of effort that I do, whether it be for schoolwork or chores or the job that I have? Maybe some of you play on a sports team, and why is it that I give the level of effort that I give on my sports team? I think that if we were to do some self-evaluation, what we would realize is that we are entirely selfishly motivated. In all the things that we do, who are we doing it for? I think if we really checked our heart, if we were really honest with ourselves, the reason we do what we do is to benefit us. We don't necessarily think of the needs of others. Maybe occasionally we do, but by and large, the reason we go about anything that we do, whether it's putting in a certain level of effort in school into our grades or coming home at the end of the day and locking ourselves in our room and just scrolling endlessly on our phone or playing video games, what are you loving? Who are you serving? I think all of us need to humble ourselves and learn the lesson from the ant. Learn that diligence is necessary in life, but not just diligence, but selfless diligence. You see, because the whole thing changes, the whole paradigm of work changes when it stops being about us and starts being about others. Because all of us will be motivated to a certain degree if the work is only about us. But if the motivation changes and shifts to being to benefit others, well, then a certain level of effort is going to be given then. And so the question that this illustration prompts us to ask ourselves is, who am I working for? Who am I working for? What are all my efforts? What are all my tasks and labors? Who are they for? Are they for myself or for others? I think if we're honest with ourselves, we often would have to say it's for ourselves. Well, this brings us to our third illustration from verses 9 through 11. So read them with me. The father cries out, "How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and your poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like an armed man." Point number 3 in your notes, be aware of the outcome of laziness. Be aware of the outcome of laziness. I mentioned earlier that laziness is not necessarily one size fits all, but here in the illustration that we're given, we see a helpful description of it. Later on in the Proverbs, the lazy person, the same word that's used as the sluggard, is described as someone like the hinges of a door, going back and forth, but going back and forth is like you on your bed. It's a really dramatic picture, but this is the picture of someone who loves their bed a little bit too much. How many of you know you have comfy beds, right? And when that alarm clock goes off, the last thing you want to do is get up because you're nice and warm and comfy, and that alarm clock has just disrupted your peace and your comfort. And it's the last thing you want to do is to get up. This is the description of the sluggard. The sluggard is the one who says, I can wait a little bit longer. I can sleep a little bit more. Eventually, it gets to the point where it begins affecting the person's life so that they begin to be late to things that are important. They may have consequences for their laziness, like maybe losing a job or failing in classes, getting the consequences from parents for their laziness. But the antithesis of being lazy is pictured in verse 11. Your poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like an armed man. And in the first illustration, the poverty coming upon you is like the poverty that comes upon someone when they are robbed of all of their possessions. But the second illustration, the second one here, is want like an armed man. And here, it's pointing to the antithesis, the logical conclusion of laziness. Instead of being like the ant, where you're not only providing for the needs that you have, but also caring for the needs of others, the express opposite of this is to be a thief. To be so poor, to have no money whatsoever, and to have such lack, such want, that you begin to take from others what is not yours. This is the ultimate conclusion of where laziness will lead you to. And so this is the final kind of ultimate example of what laziness can do. And maybe not all of us will get there, but just like in the illustration of the shady business deal, and not all of us being tempted with that, I know that most of you probably won't be tempted to stay in bed so long that it costs you everything that you've got, whether it be your grades, your job, or so on and so forth. But again, the same principles are still within our hearts. That same craving for comfort and leisure, that same entitlement that says I deserve rather than I ought to work, is still at play here in this illustration. The logical conclusion, if this were to be carried out until its conclusion, you would end up like a thief. Someone who is, instead of working hard, taking from the hard work of others. I hope that would be none of you here, but how do you think thieves come about? Do you think one day they just wake up and say, I think I'm going to take everybody's stuff? No, there's a greedy heart. There's a heart that longs, a covetous heart that longs for the things of others and is not willing to do the hard work that it takes to get those things. And so be aware of the outcome that laziness brings. And I think that we can be aided by our instruction that comes from the ant. But this is really where our final point for this evening, and this is really what I think all three of these illustrations are trying to encapsulate and teach all together. And that is that our motivation is the most important thing when it comes to our work. I think unwittingly, a lot of us have adopted the world's philosophy of work. Let me paint what the world's philosophy is for you. Get a great job, earn lots of money so that you can provide for all the needs of you and that future family that you want, and those things aren't necessarily wrong. But then I want to earn even more money than I need to live on so I can build up that big retirement account so that I can retire young and be able to enjoy all the comfort and leisure that retirement brings. And during my working years, I want to earn enough so that I can go on these beautiful, awesome vacations with my family and be able to do my hobbies and all the things that bring me kind of pleasure and comfort along the way. Can you see the picture that is being painted here? You are at the center of this image, and your comfort, your leisure, your cravings, your desires is at the center of it all. Friends, this is an absolutely worldly philosophy when it comes to work. Now, am I saying you should get a job that makes you poor? No, don't hear that. That's not what I'm saying. Right? I think we're even instructed by this by looking at the ant that we should be hard workers. And I'll tell you this, where there is someone willing to work and be a hard worker, they will not have lack. I think that's another thing that we can draw out of these illustrations. And so it's important that we work hard, but what's more important than just the hard work itself is the motivation behind it. And again, this brings us back to the fear of the Lord. And so point number 4 in your notes is be motivated in your work by the fear of the Lord. Be motivated in your work by the fear of the Lord, because our motivation impacts everything. When you think about work, when you think about a job, when you think about even your responsibilities that you have at home or the future homes that you desire to have, what should be the motivation to work hard? What will keep you motivated to work hard? And what I think this proverb, and what I know this proverb is trying to teach us and wants us to grasp onto, is that it's the fear of the Lord is the only proper motivation for work. The fear of the Lord is the only proper motivation that will actually fuel us for the work that we have to do. Because understand this, friends, that leisure and comfort is not what God created you for. Even in Genesis chapter 1, before sin ever entered the picture, God places Adam and Eve in the garden to cultivate and to keep it. And I'd argue with you that that is an extremely hard job to do, even in an unfallen, unstained world. And so hard work is not the enemy, and leisure and comfort is not the end goal. Let me say that one more time. Hard work is not the enemy, and comfort and leisure is not the end goal. You don't work until you're 65 just so that at the end of it, you can throw your hands up and say, okay, I put in my time, now it's time to relax for the rest of my life. Even from what we learned last week in Pastor Ben's sermon in the morning, that a person who gives all their time to comfort and leisure basically is dead already. You're not even living. God created you to work. So work is not the enemy. Any of you seen that, maybe that viral podcast clip that was going around maybe about a month ago? There was this girl and she was on a podcast with a guy and she was talking about how there's this slogan that you should love your job. And she says, no, I don't think you should love your job. I think you should job your love, right? And the guy, because it's on a podcast, he's like, oh, that's so deep. And everyone just looks at that and that means nothing. It's like, what are you even talking about? Job your love? And then I saw in the comments, so this is something I do with my time. One of the comments underneath was, don't face your fear, fear your face. But there is in our own culture, and I say that, but there is in our culture this idea that we've got to love what we do, and we've got to have such a passion and a zeal for the actual object of the work that it is that we're doing. Can I tell you that there's very few people that actually get to do the thing that they're most passionate about in life as their occupation? I hate to burst your bubble, but hard work is hard work. Having a job is work. Whether you're bagging groceries at Walmart or whether you're an executive in a humongous business, work is work. And even if you have a little bit of an enjoyment in the work that you do, all work is hard work. I'll tell you what, I love my job. I absolutely love that what I get to do for my occupation is to disciple young men and women and to teach God's word week in and week out. I absolutely love it. But can I also tell you, it's not just a walk in the park. It's hard work. And so any job you do, even if you love the job you're doing, is still going to be hard work. And that's not bad. Okay, so for all of you young people about to enter into the workforce, maybe most of you men, because I know a lot of you women just want to be stay-at-home moms, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, but I think being a stay-at-home mom is even more hard work than being a guy who goes out and does a 9 to 5. And all the stay-at-home moms are going to clap, right? I know, because my wife does it every single week. Every single day she's at home taking care of Thomas, and it's hard work. And so you may love what you do, and if you're one of the few people that get to do something for your occupation that you also love, okay, that's wonderful, but it's still hard work. And so understand, hard work's not the enemy. But as we look toward the future and we long for certain things to be in our future, is what we're really longing for leisure and comfort and fun activities to do? Is that all we're longing for? Guys, I think you've got the wrong idea. I think really the world has gotten a hold of your heart and your mind and has implanted in you philosophies that have no business being taught to you because they have no place in God's word. God's desire for you is that you would work hard, but not only that you would work hard, but that you would work hard for him. This is why the fear of the Lord is what ought to be our motivation, because even if you're doing a job that is stressful, even if you're doing a job that is not the thing that you love most in life, you're not passionate about it, whether this be for work or whether this be just the normal things you do in your life, all the labors you give yourself to. We often look, because the world tells us to, that the job itself would be the fuel for our passion, when really we've got it all wrong. What ought to be our fuel for passion is the fear of God. That affectionate reverence, that love-filled worship is what is both the fuel for the fire and our objective that we're striving for. And so there is no retirement. Maybe you'll complete your years of working in the labor force, but there is no retirement from hard work. Until we draw our last breath, God has an objective. God has a job for you to do. And so the question, I think that kind of sums all of this up, these three illustrations, is what is your view of work and what is your motivation for work? Because if it's anything short of the fear of the Lord and loving and worshiping him with your work, whether it be a job or just the normal labors that we give ourselves to, whatever it is, if our motivation is not worshiping God, I'm telling you, your fuel is going to cause you to burn out. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get dissatisfied, discontent with whatever work you have to do because you don't have the right fuel source. You don't have the right fuel source. God's glory is the only thing that is capable of fueling us the way that we ought to be fueled, motivated the way we ought to be motivated. And so what I'm challenging with each and every one of you tonight is to take stock of what you have as your motivation for work. What is it at the center of your motivation? Why do I want to work hard? Why do I want to apply myself? Why in school do I want to study hard? Why in my chores that I do at home do I want to do them well without having to be told? What's the motivation? If it's selfish, I'm telling you, you don't have a sufficient motivation. You ought to be motivated by your love and worship for God. This is what will lead you toward desiring excellence, always desiring to be better and better. And I'm telling you what, there is something absolutely beautiful about seeing someone who is enamored by the glory of God and devotes themselves to their craft, whatever it is. Whether it is that stay-at-home mom faithfully and tenderly caring for her children, whether it's a musician who practices day in and day out at their skill so that they can produce beautiful music to the glory of God. There is something that is awe-inspiring in it. When we see it, we look at it and we say, wow. Friends, what do you want to accomplish with your lives? Is your end goal so puny as to just have a nice, long retirement, a comfortable life? Is that it? I think that's weak. Strive for more. Strive for bringing glory to your God. Strive for worshiping him with every labor that you give yourself to. This is the proper motivation. And so what this also does is protects us from these things that we see in these illustrations. Having God at the center of our motivation keeps us from greed, keeps us from laziness, keeps us from selfishness, and helps us to have a proper view of work and a proper perspective and motivation for why we ought to work and what we are doing. So friends, have the right motivation. And if you want a job you love, okay. But more than this, love the God who's given you work to do. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for your word. We even thank you that you've created us as beings to work hard. And this isn't bad. This is good. This is by your good design. And God, you've not made us for leisure and comfort, so I pray that we would sacrifice those idols. Pray that we would recognize where the world has led us astray, even in what we think about work, but that we'd have a biblical perspective, a perspective that is driven from a desire to worship you and to love you. God, you are the perfectly good God who gives us all things, and so we should have a desire to serve you and worship you and work hard, not as unto man, but as unto the Lord. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.